After a plane crashed in the Pacific Ocean, Edward and 2 other men managed to survive and were left adrift in a lifeboat. On the 7th day, Tom and Sam started fighting like beasts over the last canteen of water. Determined to stop the duel, Edward picks up a flare and threatens to pull the trigger, but ends up becoming the new target. While Tom attacks Edward, Sam picks up a knife to stab him, but is also wounded and both fall into the water. At that moment, their blood attracts the attention of a shark that is swimming nearby and Sam takes a bite. Seeing his adversary being dragged to the bottom of the sea, Tom climbs back to the surface and attacks Edward for the boat. However, the man manages to get rid of the lance and uses a paddle to hit his opponent on the head, leaving a huge pool of blood in the water. A few days later, Edward is found by the crew of a large vessel and rescued alive. Despite severe dehydration, the man is still conscious and Montgomery says he will pay the captain of the boat to leave him on the mainland. But before he does, the vet will land on an island which, according to him, is a paradise. The next morning, Edward is feeling much better and discovers that his boat has docked on Moreau Island. According to Montgomery, the captain hasn't agreed to take him to the mainland, so Edward will have to go with him to that island. After unloading the countless cages of animals he has taken to the island, Montgomery heads into the forest and distributes these animals in vivariums that have been built in the middle of nowhere. Seeing all those rabbits, Edward reveals that he had a pet rabbit when he was a child and loved it very much. At that moment, the veterinarian breaks the neck of one of the animals and says that he will serve it for dinner. He then drives to a small village and Edward discovers that there are several people living on the island. After entering one of the houses, Montgomery orders his friend to wait for him there, as he has some business to attend to. While carefully observing every detail of the decor, Edward discovers that the man who lives in the house is called Dr. Moreau and has won several awards for his research into genetic manipulation. Suddenly, he spots a woman dancing on the balcony and decides to go closer to observe her movements. Upon noticing Edward's presence, Aisa is startled, but soon realizes that the man is not a threat. After introducing herself, Aisa reveals that she is Dr. Moreau's daughter and has lived on the island since she was a child. Just then, Montgomery appears and the woman leaves. At that moment, he takes Edward to his quarters and reveals that Dr. Moreau, who everyone thought was perished, moved to that island after animal rights activists made him leave the United States. After entering the room, Montgomery locks the door and says he did it to ensure Edward's safety. Despite hearing that this is for his own good, the visitor decides to flee the place and uses a rod to open the lock. In an attempt to find out what the place is hiding, Edward sneaks into the warehouse and discovers that the place is home to a cruel laboratory. In addition to the dozens of animal species being held captive inside, there is also a group of scientists giving birth to a creature that resembles a human hybrid. Like its mother, the newborn is a mixture of human and animal and, when he discovers that this is the research Dr. Moreau is carrying out, Edward is shocked. When his presence is discovered, he immediately flees the laboratory and, on the way, encounters 2 other hybrids. Frightened, the man goes into the woods to hide, but is found by Aisa. The woman says she will help him get off the island as long as Edward promises not to do anything to harm her father. After a few minutes running through the forest, the pair reach the beach, but soon afterwards the hunters appear and the couple have to flee again. When they reach a waterfall, they come across a furry hybrid that resembles a feline while retaining human characteristics. When it realizes the presence of the humans, the creature runs into the woods and the fugitives also take the opportunity to escape. On the way, they come across a Sassamone and Aisa convinces the ape man that Edward is a friend. So the creature decides to help them find the preacher of the law and, as he can't trust anyone else on the island, Edward has no choice but to follow them. Sometime later, the trio arrive in a village full of hybrids who live like animals and Edward wonders how these creatures can live in such a filthy place. When he meets the preacher, Edward realizes that he is just a blind goat, who is considered wise because he is one of the oldest of his kind. Suddenly, everyone hears the sound of trumpets and comes out of their shelter to welcome their creator properly. With the arrival of Dr. Moreau, the hybrids have no choice but to hand over the invader and Montgomery points a gun at his head. However, instead of being ordered to shoot, the veterinarian is forced to hand the gun over to Edward and the man uses it to ward off all the monsters around him. Seeing him threatening the life of their creator, the monsters revolt and threaten to attack Edward. Just then, the doctor presses a button and the animals collapse. When he realizes that it is Moreau who is causing the suffering of those creatures who were only trying to defend him, Edward orders him to stop and realizes that the man is even worse than he could have imagined. Despite being the creator of all those monsters, Dr. Moreau has no feelings for them and considers them inferior to humans. Upon returning home, Moreau introduces Edward to his other children and the man discovers that the doctor has adopted some of his creations as members of his family. In an attempt to explain his research, Moreau reveals that the creatures Edward has met are animals that have had their genes fused with human genes and tries to convince him that the experiments he has been carrying out for the last 17 years are legitimate. In the evening, Edward returns to the main house for dinner and discovers that the deformed creatures in front of him are the result of Dr. Moreau's attempt to get rid of all the human genes that give the species destructive characteristics. His aim was to achieve the perfection of the species so that humans could resemble divine creatures in terms of purity and harmony. According to the doctor, after so many unsuccessful experiments, he is closer than ever to finding the formula to create perfect human beings, free of any malice. Just then, Azazello serves dinner and, on seeing a roast rabbit on the tray, Moreau is furious, as there is a rule forbidding anyone to eat meat on the island. Upon hearing this, Aisa reveals that, while on the run with Edward, she saw some rabbit bodies scattered in the woods and everything indicates that Lo Mai was responsible for the attack. Furious at this news, the doctor states that there will be a trial the next day and orders everyone to return to their quarters. During the night, Edward is tormented by nightmares and runs to the pier, hoping to escape by boat. However, when he gets there, he is surrounded by humanoid rats and has to flee to avoid being attacked by them. The next morning, during the trial, Lo Mai is convicted of breaking the law that forbids taking the lives of other animals and he revolts. Furious, he runs towards his creator and is about to eliminate him when Dr. Moreau presses a button that activates a chip installed in his brain and the creature falls to the ground. As he approaches him, the doctor says he will forgive him for his crimes, but Azazello acts too quickly and shoots Lo Mai in the head under the pretext that he is helping to protect the law. On his father's orders, Azazello takes Lo Mai's body to the incinerator and, meanwhile, Edward runs to the radio booth to try to call for help, but he can't get through to the outside. After the feline's body is destroyed, Kirill goes to pay his respects to his old friend and finds the chip that was installed inside his body. After removing the chip that was implanted in his own body, Kirill begins to watch Montgomery and everyone who works for Dr. Moreau closely, as he has lost all trust in them. When he discovers that the monkey has removed his implant, the vet rushes to get his gun and tries to shoot him, but fails. In an attempt to prevent the rebel from escaping, Montgomery orders Azazello to gather a group of hunters to capture him and Kirill is chased to the beach, where he has the chance to expose his findings. At dusk, Montgomery appears at the radio booth and discovers that Edward has convinced Maling to fix the communicator so that he can call for help. When he has a chance to explain his discovery to the others, Kirill convinces them to go to Dr. Moreau and ask him what they are. Despite calling the doctor their father, the creatures have never understood why they are different from him, so Moreau tries to evade the subject. His aim is to buy time for Magi to give him his remote control to stop the monsters. However, as soon as he presses the button, Moreau discovers that the monsters have removed their implants and have now decided to ignore the law that prevents them from eliminating. Realizing that his life is in danger, the doctor picks up a skull that was being used as decoration and strikes one of the felines, but ends up being attacked and bitten on the shoulder. When the doctor falls to the ground, the creatures gather to eliminate him once and for all and feed on the flesh of their creator. Seeing Dr. Moreau's body torn apart, Edward draws his gun and starts shooting at the beasts, which decide to run away so as not to end up being eliminated. Just then, Aisa appears and Edward prevents her from getting close to her father's body so that the young woman won't be traumatized. With the help of the law preacher and her brothers, Aisa holds a proper wake for her father and everyone wonders how to move on now that their creator is no longer with them. In an attempt to reassure them, the preacher of the law says that Dr. Moreau has not left them, because his spirit will always be there to guide them. As Edward approaches Aisa to try and console her, he notices that her teeth are turning into fangs and the woman reveals that she is undergoing an accelerated process of change. According to her, there is a serum that can stop the transformation, so Edward decides to go after Montgomery for help, but soon realizes that the veterinarian is unwilling to cooperate. Instead of telling him where the serum is, Montgomery claims to have destroyed it and Edward despairs. Meanwhile, Kirill and his henchmen are planning to set fire to the pier to prevent anyone from entering or leaving the island. Suddenly, Azazello appears and the hyena realizes that he is armed. In an attempt to stop his enemy, Kirill uses Dr. Moreau's device to cause him pain, but is surprised to discover that Azazello intends to join the revolution. Promising to help the gang that eliminated his father get more ammunition, Azazello asks them to remove the chip from his body. At that moment, Kirill orders his henchmen to hold Azazello down and uses his own teeth to cut a hole in his ribcage. After removing the implant, the monster accepts Azazello as the new member of his team and shares with him his plan to take control of the island and all its inhabitants. Kirill then sets fire to the pier and blows up all the communication towers so that no one can get in touch with the outside world to report what is happening. Now that Dr. Moreau is no longer in charge, Montgomery finds a loophole to establish his monarchy. While sitting in the chair that belonged to his predecessor, the veterinarian gives gifts to the creatures in order to gain their sympathy and trust. At that moment, Edward is in the laboratory and finds a tube of blood with a label on which his surname is written. While rummaging through the fridge, he comes across the serum that Aissa was using to slow down her transformation and discovers that the substance was synthesized from his blood. After making these discoveries, Edward becomes even more curious to find out what else Dr. Moreau did with his DNA and finds numerous photos that suggest he was found perished. After winning over his subjects, Montgomery gathers as many monsters as possible around him to tell a story and celebrate, but the event is interrupted by the arrival of Azazello. On seeing the canine hybrid, Montgomery gets up to hug him and thanks Azazello for his loyalty over the years. Despite being one of Dr. Moreau's favorite creatures, Azazello was never loyal to his father, as he didn't agree with his philosophy of never eliminating anyone. So when Montgomery showed up with the proposal of rebellion, Azazello didn't think twice before joining him and accepting him as his new master. However, now that Dr. Moreau is eliminated and his implant has been removed, Azazello rebels against the vet and shoots him in the chest. After eliminating him, the monster hands the pistol to Kirill, who shoots Montgomery's corpse countless times just for the pleasure of eliminating. Minutes later, Aissa arrives at the laboratory and hugs Edward. The man then remembers the words of Dr. Moreau, who said he was about to complete the goal of his research. It's only then that Edward realizes that Aissa is the doctor's latest creation and is angry at having been deceived. His last memory was of surviving a plane crash, and Montgomery made Edward believe that he had been saved by him. However, the truth is that the man was captured on purpose so that his DNA could be used to stop Aissa's regression. The problem is that, after Dr. Moreau's perishment, Montgomery destroyed the entire serum, so there is nothing to stop the woman from transforming. When she is informed about the rebellion and learns what is to come, Aissa rushes to free the animals that are trapped in the laboratory and orders them to flee. Minutes later, Kirill and his henchmen appear in a vehicle and blow up the laboratory with the aim of eliminating the last 2 humans left on the island. When he realizes that Edward and Aissa have escaped and fled into the forest, Kirill orders his henchmen to go after them. Meanwhile, the hyena breaks into Dr. Moreau's office and enjoys himself while using his machine gun to destroy everything around him. Terrified and not knowing where to go, Edward and Aissa run to the law preacher's hideout and, when they get there, find Montgomery's lifeless body. While the couple mourn the vet's perishment, Azazello appears and orders the creatures under his command to capture Edward. In an attempt to defend him, Aissa uses her claws to strike her enemies and tries to keep them away from the human. Realizing that she won't be able to defeat all those monsters, Aissa sets out to attack Azazello, but the animals gather to protect their master and the young woman has to flee. However, during her escape, she ends up being captured by her brother, who ties a rope around her neck and pushes her down. Seeing Aissa being hanged, all Edward's hope disappears and he is consumed by a feeling of hatred that motivates him to take revenge on those animals. Like the law preacher, Edward is treated as an enemy, and Kirill says he will use them as an example, so that everyone knows what happens to those who don't accept the new government. Despite also having animal DNA, like everyone else, the law preacher was extremely loyal to Dr. Moreau, and his sense of justice won't allow him to support Kirill's revolution, even though he knows it will cost him his own life. As soon as he completes all the tasks he has been assigned, Azazello is betrayed by the hyena and shot down, because Kirill has never forgiven him for taking Lo Mai's life. In an attempt to convince the others to follow his orders from now on, Kirill tries to convince the preacher of the law to announce him as the new leader, but the old man refuses. Realizing that he won't be able to change his mind, the hyena goes to talk to Edward and uses Dr. Moreau's control to cause pain in everyone present, except Maling, who, thanks to her kind and peaceful nature, has never had a control chip implanted in her body. When Kirill's subjects start shooting at the other creatures, Edward decides to play his game to prevent more eliminations from happening, so he claims that the hyena is a god who should be worshipped. The problem is that, like Kirill, all his henchmen have also fed on Dr. Moreau's flesh, so it's impossible to decide which of them will be the next leader. On hearing this, Kirill gets up and starts shooting all his cronies, eliminating every ally who supported him in his rebellion. During the shooting, the hyena also ends up being hit, and Maling uses a lit torch to destroy the place where the rebels are. Even after the explosion, Kirill survives and, despite being seriously wounded, the demented man insists on eliminating Edward, even if that's the last thing he does. However, on seeing the hyena walking towards him, The man takes out a gun and threatens to shoot it if it takes another step. At this point, Kirill decides to accept his defeat and tries to flee, but is ambushed by the other animals he was holding hostage and brutally beaten. Knowing that he is at a disadvantage, Kirill tries to sneak away from the blows and looks for an escape route, but Edward grabs his gun and stops him. With nowhere to go, the hyena decides to walk towards the fire and his body is slowly consumed by the flames. After helping the inhabitants of the island to free themselves from Kirill's oppression, Edward begins to build a raft to leave. Now that their master perished, the animals need someone to rule them and Assassimone begs Edward to stay with them, but the man promises that he will return with a team of scientists to try and help them. However, the law preacher says that his people will no longer be guinea pigs for any experiments. Now that Dr. Moreau is no longer alive, the animals will be able to follow their true nature and embrace their own instincts. So Edward leaves with the promise never to return and never to reveal the location of that island. Despite fulfilling his promise to the preacher, the man was unable to keep the secret about the existence of the hybrids to himself and published a book in which he recounted everything he had experienced during his stay there. Since returning to civilization, every time he looks around and observes humans, Edward notices that they have several characteristics in common with the beastmen. As he sees animal nature dominating the human race more and more, Edward becomes pessimistic about the future, as he realizes that humanity is not very different from what he experienced during his stay on Dr. Moreau's island. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.